Previously, I've deep dived Nintendo's entire development operation for games and technology from their development bases in Kyoto, Tokyo, Redmond, Austin, Paris, Florida, and Vancouver to all their known development partners in Japan and around the world. But the world of Nintendo development is constantly changing. Multiple times in the past, when Nintendo has grown, it has reconfigured its teams, often splitting them down so that what was once single groups become multiple groups. Hence, what was once Research and Development Group 4, the Video Games Research Division in the 1980s, came to expand into pretty much their entire game development operation. Already, Nintendo is becoming quite vague about the precise configuration of their game development teams, with some developer interviews dispensing with precise group numbers that have been in place since the 2015 reorganization. It seems to me very possible that a major reconfiguration is overdue, and there are a few signs as to the approach that they might take with this. In February 2020, Shuntaro Furukawa slipped a quiet announcement into the company's third quarter financial results presentation. He said, "Lastly, I'd like to touch on two other matters. The first has to do with the consolidation of our Tokyo offices. Currently, our group is divided among 4 offices in Tokyo for operations, including development. This separation of locations is inconvenient in terms of operational efficiency, and for that and other reasons, these locations will be consolidated into a single office together with a part of our group companies to create a system that can boost operational efficiency. The new Tokyo office will be located in Kanda Nishichiko in Chiyoda Ward, and preparations are being made for the move." End quote. It was never entirely clear which 4 offices they were referring to, but we can identify the EPD 8 development group behind chiefly the 3D Mario titles, their 1UP studio support group, the Tokyo base of Nintendo sales, and a 4th group that I've not seen reliably identified, but could either be their corporate head offices, but potentially also the Tokyo branch of what was once called Nintendo Platform Technology Department. It also seems that Nintendo Pictures have an office here as well. One curious thing is that it's not just Nintendo who have moved into this building. Pokemon developers Game Freak and Kirby developers HAL Laboratory also now have offices in the same Kanda Nishichiko building. It is a large building and so very capable of holding multiple people, and it seems likely that, following the same principles, some of Nintendo's other Tokyo-based talents such as Monolith Soft and Nintendo Cube could ultimately follow suit in joining together into a single building for operational efficiency. In Kyoto, though, Nintendo is taking a more muscular approach to building its development arm. Originally planned for 2028, the new Kyoto development building will involve at least the original 12 stories that has been proposed, with the possibility of more than 13 floors, to, according to a Nintendo Live translation of a Nikkei article, cater to a long-term increase in development personnel. This all follows the same broad principles that Furukawa outlined, centralizing development offices. A few more long-term trends we can point to. First of all, the cross-pollination of different studios within Nintendo. Of course, back in the 1990s, it was quite common for people to bop between different major games. Yoshiaki Koizumi worked on Super Mario 64, then Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and then Super Mario Sunshine, all in key roles, even though now these franchises are separated between different EPD groups. But as time has gone by, we've tended to see the same teams doubling down, at least at the senior positions. Fujibayashi has been directing mainline Zelda since 2011's Skyward Sword, and Switch Sports seems to reassemble more or less intact many of the key people who started out on the original Wii Sports. There have always been a degree of crossovers outside the core group, of course, especially with art teams, but with Zelda's Shinomori and the 3D Mario team's Koichi Hayashida coming over to help lead Super Mario Bros. Wonder, it represented a significant development of that team, which had previously been focused on Mario Maker and Pikmin, with many of the same staff in place since 2012. This isn't some accidental byproduct either. Hayashida explicitly explained in the Ask the Developer interview for Super Mario Bros. Wonder, my mission in this project was to apply my experiences from the development of 3D Mario games to a 2D Mario game. End quote. There are also further changes that seem likely in the years to come. One of the sad realities we must all face is that one day these senior people that we've grown to know and love will decide to retire and move on and may no longer be around. And while I hope as a gamer those days are long in the future, it will be wise of Nintendo to make its next move one that represents a decisive generational leap in certain respects. Currently, there are some oddities in the way the groups are configured. It's most obvious with Mario. Takashi Tezuka, Miyamoto's number 2 since the very first Super Mario Bros. Title in 1985, has been with 2D Mario all this time, even up until and including Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Meanwhile, the sports titles are managed broadly elsewhere. Another department has Mario Kart, and the Mario and Luigi team are covered elsewhere, while Tanabe's team handle Paper Mario. Kensuke Tanabe's portfolio of games is particularly large and broad, covering Metroid Prime, Paper Mario, and Luigi's Mansion, as well as a number of other titles in recent years. All of this opens up some interesting long-term questions. Until now, groups like Retro Studios and Next Level Games could be shepherded directly from the center of Kyoto because the Japanese development staff were the most intimately familiar with their franchises in question. But it's not necessarily the case that there will be many other people in Japan as familiar with, let's say, Luigi's Mansion to the same degree as many staff members at Next Level Games in Vancouver who will have been working on Luigi's Mansion now potentially for about 10 or more years. I am sure they will want the Kyoto team to be the nerve center of their operations, but it seems like a more distributed power structure may give more latitude to Nintendo's various branches. How can this be managed, though? We also know that Nintendo has sharpened its online networking capabilities within its studios. Since the development of Super Mario Galaxy, Miyamoto was able to get in a video conference suite in Kyoto and harangue the 3D Mario team in Tokyo directly, but the same technology we see in Game Chat was evidently pioneered at Nintendo since and even during the pandemic era. We also have evidence from 2 recent games, Super Mario Wonder and Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, that development started with a very open call for ideas from all staff, regardless of background and regardless of seniority. Hayashida recalled, 3D Mario games are sometimes described by the media and players as a toy box of ideas, so I decided to apply some of the ideas we used to create 3D Mario games to a 2D Mario game. With these things in mind, we decided to have an idea sharing session. Everyone from programmers to designers and sound designers joined in and wrote down gameplay ideas on sticky notes, which could be unrelated to their field of expertise, and we made prototypes on the spot. There were just so many ideas. Before this interview, I counted the number of sticky notes we had, and there were over 2,000. End quote. Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma and Grezzo director Satoshi Terada share similar experiences of their experience canvassing opinions of Grezzo. While traditional ideas have come top-down, in order to ensure that Nintendo as a company is open to new creative initiatives, it seems like there is a greater effort to canvass opinions from all staff. Koji Kondo reports telling developers, you may be in charge of music or sound effects, but above all else, you're a game creator, so bring various ideas to the table, and if there's anything in the game that you find strange, don't hesitate to speak up. Okay, it looks like there's a coherent picture building up. In the interest of operational efficiency, which includes the ability to effectively cross-pollinate the various development teams that had previously been siloed off, Nintendo have centered a good deal of their Tokyo development and are aiming to do so with Kyoto as well, expanding into the process. The question then becomes, how will Nintendo reconfigure their development setup. The structure in 2015 of 10 development teams for games, plus a mobile development group, a technology team, well, that's already been superseded. In the past, Nintendo's restructures have split down groups, reflecting their key priorities: software development, technology development, and so on. This goes back to when there were separate development teams for research and development on arcade content, toys, and video games. I would suggest that there may be different pressures and priorities today. We already know that Nintendo is expanding considerably. It had barely 5,000 staff in 2016, and in 2024 it was nearing 8,000 with a steady rate of expansion. At the current rate, it could be at 10,000 by the time its new Kyoto offices are built, and of course that doesn't include all the many external partnerships that they have been making. Just as they subdivided and subdivided their previous groups to make a far larger and more diversified set of teams, I could see the same thing happening here, and the rest of this video is going to consider what that might look like. Before we go on, a note of caution. Everything I've highlighted so far is factual and grounded. What's about to follow, though, is a projection of where Nintendo could go, but it's purely illustrative, and while I've tried to anticipate their current goals and strategic requirements, at the end of the day, let's be frank, this is purely a flight of fancy. It's a tour through Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. This is basically the Nintendo fan equivalent of playing fantasy football or fantasy baseball or what have you. I think it's hugely fun, and you may like to do your own configurations in the comments below, but if you just like the more grounded analytical content of this channel, then this video may probably be over for you. If you want to think about how Nintendo could reorientate its development structure, though, stick around, because I'm going to sketch out what I think could be a new structure for Nintendo's development groups. Some principles. First of all, in keeping with Nintendo's increasing wish to centralize and standardize, I am no longer treating the Kyoto hub as the only key group, but assuming that networking technology is probably sufficient, that it should be possible for groups across of Nintendo's development operations to work together. If there's someone with a concept in Tokyo, a design lead in Redmond, and programmers in Vancouver and Kyoto, they should theoretically be able to get together to develop a project pitch. It's evidently far more difficult to do so, and the chances for ideas to spontaneously emerge in this way are probably far less than having everyone together, but it strikes me that in a company centered around creativity, it must be useful to try to draw in as many varied and different ideas as possible. This does mean that while the old quirky names of studios may remain, Retro Studios, Next Level Games, Mario Club, and so on, we're probably looking at a point where effectively these entities will simply be regional development teams, and while I'd be a bit sad about that, it wouldn't be completely astonishing if one day Nintendo simply rebrand everything to emphasize that unity. Nintendo Austin, Nintendo Redmond, and so on. Having said all that, I would still expect the Kyoto building to be the nerve centre through which everything is routed in the main, at least for the purposes of having a singular office that people can work from, and so I'm going to use the floors of this new building as the guiding structure for where every Nintendo project in their development roster is going to be located. Secondly, Nintendo's new development priorities are not simply based around technology. IP management is also going to be absolutely crucial for them going forward, and so a major element of this project is finding ways to build around their core IP plans. They also need to develop for mobile, for entertainments in toys, and for other lifestyle products such as Alamo, and so this paints a picture of a Nintendo development operation that is far broader in scope than we've seen until this point, in many respects reverting back to where they were in the 1980s, where they were far more diversified before they really went in for video game technology in a major way. I'm sketching out a future-facing vision for how Nintendo could structure themselves, which would allow the company to branch into new and exciting avenues. Thirdly, I'm not getting too bogged down with particular personalities because many of the key people around whom previous reorganizations have centered, people like Tanabe, Sakamoto, Aonuma, and others, are unlikely to still be at the heart of things in 10 years, let alone the 20-year time period or longer that this reorganization will be designed to facilitate. It will be possible to name people with specific areas of interest. Kaoru Miyachi has very clearly been identified as the heir to Sakamoto's work on Famicom Detective Club, for example, but that's getting more granular than is really needed for something like this. Fourthly, the scale of what I'm suggesting here is just in terms of numbers of teams, and there are 2, 3, 4 times the number of teams Nintendo has at present, but largely this is by subdividing and reorganizing the groups, as has been the habit with previous reconfigurations, which have often increased the number of teams by similar amounts. Still, it's definitely a reconfiguration anticipating growth, and while Nintendo do like to keep their development groups fairly consistent over time, they also do make changes now and then where needed. So, let's get into it. Let's sit back and picture the new Kyoto building. 12 main floors plus a few extra floors for spillover development and to allow room for expansion. Let's imagine that you find the golden ticket and are invited through the doors to Nintendo's HQ of 2030. What might you expect to see? Let's start with floor 1, and here I suggest will be based the Mario Development Group. At some point, Nintendo will need somebody to be that avatar for the spirit of Mario once Miyamoto and Tezuka-san are sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere, and yet Nintendo will want everything from the films to each of the games to be coordinated. That doesn't mean there won't be outside partnerships, that doesn't mean there won't be distinctive groups within EPD, but I think it does mean that it would make a lot of sense to subdivide EPD and give their Mario game efforts a distinctive overall department. I noted when reviewing the end of fiscal year presentation from Nintendo that they had taken to referring to Mario-related titles and other new titles, and I thought this was curious wording. Granted, there were a lot of recent Mario titles, but then there usually are. Why frame this as two separate considerations? Well, maybe if the company is planning to look to the two types of games being treated and categorized separately with potentially different sales targets and expectations. After all, surely even a low-performing Mario title has different expectations than most other titles. So yes, I think it's completely plausible that we could see a Mario development wing for the developers focused on the plumbing prodigy. With this, there would be subgroups. These aren't the direct equivalent of groups that exist at the moment, as I would anticipate each of the current groups splitting down between their Mario-centric and non-Mario functions, in the same way that all the video game operation is the result of progressive splitting of groups from the old R&D 4. So Mario Software Development Group 1 would be the 3D Mario team, still based in Tokyo with probably just a small coordinating office in the Kyoto building. There will be a lot of interaction with the rest of the Mario group because for the first time specific managers for the Mario brand will be overseeing the full range of development options. Mario Software Development Group 2 would therefore be the 2D Mario group, who would also be responsible for Super Mario Maker. Potentially, this team could be swelled in size to the point where both games could be developed concurrently, but realistically, 2D Mario games probably don't take that long to actually make, and the real issue is thinking of ideas to go into the games in the first place. And so having the ability for that team to produce a Super Mario Bros. Title and a Super Mario Maker title per generation would probably be perfectly fine. Mario Software Development Group 3 would be the Mario Kart team. Again, this would not be the entirety of the old EPD9, but would include a large number of their people, as well as new people dedicated to continual support for Mario Kart World and other future Mario Kart endeavors, including apps, theme park attractions, and spin-offs such as Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. Then we have Mario Software Development Group 4, which would be the Mario Party team, which, like Group 1, would basically be an office coordinating with Nintendo Cube in Tokyo, who are largely behind Mario Party's efforts, and I imagine will continue to do so. However, currently a few producers at the EPD co-production group handle Nintendo Cube, but instead big chunks of Nintendo Cube, now fully owned by Nintendo after all, would themselves identify as being part of the more cohesive internal Mario group, which should in theory lend itself to thinking about the Mario brand more broadly than just how to do the next party game. The idea here will be to promote far more cross-group thinking in the Mario teams than currently exists, with the Kyoto offices coordinating this endeavor but working very closely with Nintendo Cube in Tokyo, who would have their own Mario people based and coordinated with the core group. Mario Software Development Group 5 will be the Mario Sports team. Currently, Camelot handle tennis and golf, Next Level Games handle strikers, and Bandai Namco occasionally turn their hands to baseball and other associated sports. I have another video going into the potential around Mario Sports, but it seems to me that with the Takahashi brothers at Camelot likely on the verge of retiring, it will be a great opportunity to bring Mario Sports in-house. Between Nintendo Cube, Next Level Games, and the Mario Kart and 3D Mario teams, there should be a huge number of people with great ideas for reforging a series which has always sold moderately well, but to me feels like it's currently underachieving. Mario Tennis used to do numbers in broadly the same category as Mario Party, and yet we now see Super Mario Party games selling tens of millions, while Wii Sports and Switch Sports are also absolutely huge. If Mario games are huge and sports games are huge, it seems to me that Mario sports games should also be far more significant to Nintendo than they currently are. And whether this means a regular series of different sports games or even just one massive, once per generation Mario sports title to rule them all, I think having one cohesive team managing all these sporting endeavors would help. That's not to say they wouldn't subcontract people like Camelot or Bandai Namco for particular aspects, just that I think the series needs the same shot in the arm that Hayashida and Mori brought to Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Mario Software Development Group 6 would also be on this floor, and this would be the group focused on Mario RPGs and puzzle ventures. They would liaise with Acquire on Mario and Luigi, assuming, of course, that Acquire aren't acquired by Sony, and with Intelligent Systems on Paper Mario, plus potentially with Square Enix and Ubisoft for the Super Mario RPG and Rabbids series, though it seems pretty unlikely that the Rabbids series will continue. It would also draw in some of the core Redmond staff at Nintendo Software Technology, who have a long development history with Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and they would liaise with Arika on the development of Dr. Mario. This would be a co-production group like the erstwhile EPD2, but focused specifically on coordinating the broader Mario ventures. One aim might be to try to strike a balance between Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi. They should continue to feel very different and distinctive, but hopefully gone are the days where original Mario Universe characters are verboten. This team would be responsible for keeping track of the broader Mario lore, but also allowing developers to throw caution to the wind sometimes and experiment. It would be ideal if all the games were a bit more spaced out than the 1-2-3 punch of Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door, and Mario and Luigi Brothership, all in the space of about 12 months over the years 2023 and 2024. Maybe this was a strategic goal of the company, and I have talked before about how more narrative-focused games seem to have been a bigger focus of the Switch's later life, and this may make strategic sense for them, but I also think there's an element of just coincidence. By being part of a larger group focused specifically on Mario, Nintendo can think about pacing out Mario games with the same care that they've paced out all their other releases, although inevitably the course of game development never did run smooth, so this might not always work out. Clearly, flaw 1 is a big flaw, and I'm not necessarily suggesting all these flaws would have even numbers of people or that the layouts would work perfectly, but spiritually, this should be one cohesive group with people working on Mario Tennis, being able to bump into people working on Kart when they get coffee, and happening into a meeting with people from Redmond and the Nintendo Cube offices in Tokyo when they happen to pop their head round a door. Nintendo is above all the home of Mario, and that is the purpose of Flaw 1. However, Flaw 2 also has a strong Mario theme. If Flaw 1 is focusing on nurturing the Mario brand as it is, Floor 2 is about developing it. Mario Software Development Group 7 will be a bit like the EPD 4 of the Mario floor, a team focused purely on piloting innovative ideas or at least reviving old ones. Mario Paint, Mario Touch Typing, and the infamous I Am a Teacher Super Mario Sweater knitting program for the Famicom Computer Disk System are all examples of some wilder Mario fare, and I expect that Nintendo will want a small team who can be given the green light to experiment with the franchise and also manage teams outside Nintendo who have interesting proposals for the character, much as Ubisoft did in 2015 where they approached Nintendo about the Mario plus Rabbids game, and indeed how Velen did with the game that became Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. This would also be the group that might be actively looking into developing Wario Land, if it is to ever return, and would liaise with the Tokyo group responsible for Captain Toad Treasure Tracker on future developments of that game if it was decided to put one into production. Mario Software Development Group 8 will be focused, in fact, on Luigi. Predominantly, this team would be in Vancouver, but linked into the Kyoto offices remotely as well. Luigi's Mansion would clearly be a major concern, and I think Luigi's Mansion is now successful enough that even if many people at Next Level Games go off to work on different projects, there will still be a core group of people building up to the next big Luigi's Mansion release on a pretty much permanent basis. It may be in time there could be more Luigi games, but that's probably a distant priority right now. Of course, this group is focused on just the one game series, which is a little bit smaller than most of the current EPD groups, but of course the aim is expansion, and so over time, this smaller group may end up becoming a multi-game team. Mario Software Development Group 9 would be another small, internal-focused group. This group will be dedicated to Princess Peach. Yes, there's only been one Peach title in recent times, and it was handled by Goodfeel, who have kibitzed on a whole range of platforming fare from Wario to Kirby to Yoshi, but I'm not quite sure how well received the game was at Nintendo. I think it did its job well enough, a solid Peach game for the late era of the Switch that can be revived and promoted through the Switch 2 era. It's a solid job at trying to give Peach a game identity to go alongside her increasing prominence in the film and to some degree through the theme park, stores and such like. It's not common for Nintendo to have a character and retrofit an idea to fit, but I do think that with so many ideas being pitched to and within Nintendo, the potential exists for one to really fit Princess Peach, and I think this should be a priority for Nintendo in the medium term. After all, Luigi came a long way from having a lone Game & Watch title to his name in the form of 1990s Luigi's Hammer Toss, to Next Level Games adopting Luigi's Mansion with Dark Moon in the 2010s, and taking the franchise to huge success with Luigi's Mansion 3. If we chart Peach's origins from the first Peach title, Tosei's Super Princess Peach in 2005, then we are coming up on the same 20-year mark it took for Luigi to finally settle down and find a fixed production team. Mario Software Development Group 10 would be focused on Yoshi. Yoshi is also tied to Goodfeel, but Goodfeel don't seem to wish to be tied to Yoshi, or at least not exclusively to Yoshi, and I think Nintendo would like to try to have Yoshi titles be a regular fixture of their game consoles. But this development group wouldn't just be browbeating Goodfeel or other developers to give Yoshi games more love, but also finding broader deployments of the character. Yoshi's advantage in the Mario space is that he targets a younger audience primarily, and so with apps, toys, and more, it seems that a team developing a deep understanding of Yoshi from all aspects makes a lot of sense. And who knows, this could also include Poochie and even everyone's favourite, Cal. Also on the first floor will be a non-software team, the Mario IP development group, which will be focused on liaising with Illumination on the films, with all sorts of merchandising partners for the surfeit of Mario toys and accessories we can doubtless expect to see long into the future, as well as overseeing the Mario aspects of Nintendo's theme park areas. Finally, to make for an even 6 groups on each of the first 2 floors, we have the Donkey Kong Software Development Group. This would basically be a core team to liaise with the Donkey Kong Bonanza devs about the future of 3D Donkey Kong, and with Retro Studios about Donkey Kong Country, although perhaps the name would be to try to add back in some 3rd or 4th strings to DK's banana-shaped bow in the long term. another racing franchise, or even a return to the bongos, perhaps. Donkey Kong is a key IP in his own right, and I do think that he will have his own development group in the years to come, just like Zelda, just like Mario. But by putting him on the same floor as the Mario developers, it ensures that there is consistency in his utilization and presentation across his own games and the Mario titles. This makes for two floors wholly dedicated to Mario and to be the nerve center for the global Mario industry and game production. I think from Shuntaro Furukawa's standpoint of operational efficiency, as well as for creative serendipity to be allowed, this would all make sense. But now let's take the Great Glass Elevator up to floor 3. Floor 3 would contain one of the most important and yet smallest sized teams in the whole building. This would be the Pokemon Coordination Group working alongside Game Freak. Nintendo's ownership of Pokemon is a messy affair, best looked at in full elsewhere, but essentially, they directly own a third of the company alongside Creatures, who handle a lot of IP matters, as well as Detective Pikachu, and Game Freak, who are the series' primary developers. In reality, though, Nintendo have stakes in Creatures and may well have a stake in Game Freak as well, and Game Freak are now working only a few floors away from Nintendo's Tokyo offices. The thing is, branching Pokemon off to its own company made a lot of sense in the 1990s when Nintendo did not remotely have the capacity to manage a vast global brand internally without it sucking all the energy from the rest of their operations. But now Nintendo does manage massive, successful global brands. Game Freak has always enjoyed operational independence and have often talked about making their own games, and indeed, with titles like Little Town Hero and Pocket Card Jockey, they have done. But with the founding trio, Satoshi Sajiri, Ken Sugimori, and Junichi Masuda, all in their 50s, I suspect that Nintendo will want to do what they did with Monolith Soft and try to ensure that once these gentlemen start to think about cashing in their chips, it's Nintendo that picks up the tab. I'm not saying that they will necessarily buy Game Freak or Creatures outright in the short term, but at the very least, Nintendo will want to make sure that the Pokemon operation becomes even more deeply integrated into Nintendo so as to simplify and avoid future legal complications, if nothing else. For the purposes of this Pokemon Coordination Group, though, they would simply be the Kyoto branch office of the co-development producers for the various Pokemon games, as currently seen in the EPD co-production group, which used to be EPD 1 and 2. It's not necessarily for Nintendo to direct how all of these groups are run, but I would expect that if we were able to give them names equivalent to the Mario software development groups, they would break down into 5 main sections. Pokemon Software Development Group 1 would be 98% Game Freak staff focused on the core generational titles. Software Development Group 2 would be working on the Legends titles, again with Game Freak. Pokemon Software Development Group 3 would focus on spin-offs, including partnering with Bandai Namco on titles like New Pokemon Snap and Pokken Tournament. Pokemon Software Development Group 4 would be focused on mobile and multimedia deployment of the Pokemon. All of these will be represented in one small corner of Floor 3 because Pokemon has always been a Tokyo-based affair handled externally, and it will continue that way, but I am sure Nintendo will want to keep a close eye on the development of this major brand of theirs, just as they do with the others. Floor 3 would also include, though, the Zelda development groups. Yes, currently Aonuma manages one singular Zelda group, but as the franchise continues to expand, I think it will need to subdivide in the exact same way as the Mario groups have already done. Zelda Development Group 1 will be the core team working on open-air Zelda development, probably under the leadership of Hidemaru Fujibashi until Aonuma decides to step back, when Fujibashi may well take overall command of Zelda operations. Zelda Development Group 2 would be a co-productions team responsible for the Grezzo top-down games, liaising with the Hyrule Warriors team, working with Tantalus on development of remakes and remasters, and potentially liaising with other groups for other Zelda-related content. As with Mario, there will be a third non-software focused group, the Zelda IP Development Group, who will be responsible for branching Zelda out. One big focus, I suspect, would be the development of a Zelda response to Super Nintendo World. It's for another video to sketch out what that might be and how it might work, but I think such a task would require a separate focused group in itself. Let's move up then to floor 4. This floor will be dedicated pretty much exclusively to the team that currently goes by EPD Production Group 5, the Splatoon and Animal Crossing team. As I've detailed previously, the credit overlap between these games seems to be reducing over the Switch period, and it seems inevitable that the groups will eventually separate. The Animal Crossing production group would be of a similar size and scope to the current Zelda team, focusing mainly on the mainline games and the DLC expansions, but also potentially liaising with external studios about spin-offs and such like. I always thought that an Animal Crossing golf game would be great, with you managing your own golf course and then visiting other people, while Nintendo themselves had a bit of a swing and miss with Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. Irrespective, there's lots of scope for additional Animal Crossing development, and of course this team would also be consulted for broader IP applications of the Animal Crossing series, including potential film or television productions. Floor 4 would also need to have plenty of space for the Animal Crossing team to potentially subdivide, but they would also share a space still with the Splatoon production group, which would operate in a similar way, with mainline games, spin-off and franchise expansion activities running through a single large department with the hope of future expansion and subdivision later on. After all, with the Mario brand going from strength to strength, and Zelda becoming far bigger, with Breath of the Wild and a movie planned, the time for Animal Crossing and Splatoon to receive the same development focus must surely be nigh. Okay, floor 5 is next. This floor will be dedicated to most broader aspects of Nintendo's software development. First, we have the Pikmin development group, comprised principally of the current Pikmin team, branched off from the old EPD-10. They would also be responsible for the broader application of the franchise, such as the apps and spin-offs. I imagine this would still be one of the smaller groups, liaising extensively with outside development partners 8ing, but of course, if Nintendo becomes successful in their attempts to nurture the Pikmin franchise, then this too could become gigantic. And if it's good enough for all these other franchises, you know we need to have a Metroid development group. For decades, Samus has lived a double life. In 2D form, she's been under the watchful eye of Yoshio Sakamoto and his various partners, but the Prime series has always been the preserve of Kensuke Tanabe and Retro Studios. But with both of these fantastic gentlemen likely to be considering stepping back in the next 8 to 10 years, it stands to reason that there should be one guardian of the Metroid legacy, an Aonuma equivalent, if you will. One person, not just to liaise with Retro Studios on the Metroid Prime series and Mercury Steam on the 2D Metroid series, but also to manage any wider Samus-themed brand expansion efforts. Then we would have the Fire Emblem Development Group. Now, most of Fire Emblem is handled by the Intelligent Systems team, which is external to Nintendo, but Nintendo often have their own senior people involved, including as directors, and as the franchise becomes bigger and requires more management, I could definitely see Nintendo needing to assign a bespoke group to the franchise, even though at present this is all handled within the massive co-production EPD group, EPD 1 and 2, or sometimes just called EPD co-productions. And just as Fire Emblem is co-produced with Intelligent Systems, Kirby is co-managed with HAL Laboratories. Recently, though, HAL has moved in with the Nintendo Tokyo developers in the Kanda Nishichiko building, and with the loss of Vanpool, which recently supported their efforts, I suspect Nintendo will wish to claw Kirby more and more into their orbit and build up development support on the Nintendo side. HAL seems to be one cohesive development group, even when managing multiple titles. As far as I can see, they have a large overlap of credits of even games that were released at similar times, but long term it makes sense for them to aim for as many as 4 different Kirby groups. For 3D games in the vein of Kirby the Forgotten Land, and perhaps even more open Kirby titles still, one for the 2D titles which haven't had an original entry since 2018's Kirby Star Allies, one for smaller online titles and more diverse Kirby content, from Kirby Fighters to Kirby Air Riders, and one that essentially absorbs the current Warp Star subsidiary and focuses on management of the Kirby IP. It's not necessarily the case that Intelligent Systems and HAL would need to be absorbed into Nintendo for all of this to work, but I do suspect that the arm's length deals that made sense in the 1990s for the specific people at that point in time may not continue to make the most sense for Nintendo going forward. And if Nintendo were to invest in bringing these long-standing second-party studios in-house as they did with Next Level Games, and in the way that Monolith Soft and Nintendo Cube were progressively drawn in, it would probably streamline matters bureaucratically, if nothing else. For the time being, though, I think this remains a distant prospect. Aside from Pikmin, Metroid, Fire Emblem, and Kirby, Floor 5 would have one further space reserved, and this is for the Super Smash Bros. Production Coordination Group, whose job would currently be to support whatever Sakurai wishes to do, but long term would be to build development capability in liaison with Bandai Namco to take Super Smash Bros. Forward for when that day finally does come that Masahiro Sakurai finally feels he's had his final Smash. Let's go up another level, and then in Floor 6 we will find the general software development teams. These would all be branches or subdivisions of existing groups, but with particular specialisms. Let's go through them. Software Development Group 1 would focus on the more casual, experimental and social titles. Tomodachi Life, Miitopia, Rhythm Heaven and the WarioWare series were all once the preserve of EPD7, and while it's not clear if that group even exists as a cohesive entity, I feel like these franchises share enough DNA that they could be managed together, whether with an internal development staff or contracting out to Grezzo Intelligent Systems and perhaps other teams. This might also manage some of the other more niche franchises like Pushmo. Software Development Group 2 would probably be Kaori Miyachi's department, responsible for Nintendo's visual novels and adventure games, largely in collaboration with Mages. This would include the Famicom Detective Club series, but also they would be working with Arc System Works on Another Code and the Hotel Dusk games, and potentially even reviving past classics like Shin Onigashima. Although still a relatively small part of Nintendo's profile, these kinds of narrative games are big in Japan especially, and the potential for strong narrative experiences to be a major part of Nintendo's future is high, so having one cohesive group managing these kinds of properties should ensure stronger coordination and focus on their objectives. Software Development Group 3 would be to liaise with Monolith Soft and to manage from a Nintendo end the Xenoblade IP. Clearly, the bulk of the developers would be at their own offices, but now the company is wholly owned, we might expect more of their talented people to come into the fold in Kyoto, if only the existing group that supports the Zelda team. Software Development Group 4 would contain the rest of the erstwhile EPD9, the Mario Kart team, but those people who were not taken in by the Mario Kart group. It would be premature to call them the ARMS team, but ARMS is clearly a major IP that this team had a lot of passion for. Still, Kosuke Yabuki has talked about how this team has many original ideas, and so spinning them off into a full group to develop new IP only makes sense. Software Development Group 5 would focus on managing online titles, competitive play, and leveraging the Classics library. This would include 99 games, Nintendo World Championships, the Test Play title, and more. It would also involve building partnerships with indie developers in the manner of Snipperclips, Good Job, and The Stretchers. A lot of people from Paris and Redmond might be involved with this development group. Software Development Group 6 would be an internal team dedicated to working with internal and external partners to find a way forward for those properties that are tricky and basically to figure out how they can be taken forward. Basically, these are the next generation franchises that could spin off into their own team, but still need a lot of nurturing. The in tray could potentially be quite full, but honestly, I think the top of the in tray has to be Star Fox and F-Zero, though potentially there are others like Wave Race, potentially in collaboration with Nintendo Software Technology, who pitched for the last one, as well as Chibi Robo, Custom Robo, and Starfy, that might one day cross the Software Development Group 6 desk. This team could of course be subdivided down at a future point if and when any of these franchises truly find their feet, but much of the function of these would be partnering internal developers with external groupings in order to try to take these forgotten series forward. Okay, we've got halfway up the main 12 stories of Nintendo's new offices, but so far we've been primarily focused on servicing Nintendo's existing software development operation and building up its very core IP. Nintendo has always had far more irons in the fire, from its technology development to toys to theme parks and more, to say nothing of developing new IP for the future and rescuing deep cut IPs from the past. We haven't completely done with the software groups, and we'll even see some more familiar IPs as we ascend the building, but from here on in, things are going to get, if possible, even more speculative. But what I'm going to try to do is map out how Nintendo could continue to subdivide their operations in order to cover all the many areas in which they could, should, and I believe likely will expand over the coming years. So floor 7 would be for Nintendo systems. The company, forged in partnership with mobile telecoms giant DNA, has already done extensive work on the eShop and systems infrastructure, and with online architecture becoming ever more critical, it's going to be necessary to have this team at the heart of Nintendo's development infrastructure. Working alongside them will be the Smart Devices Software Development Group, formerly EPD 11. While I suspect the days of Nintendo primarily focusing on game apps like Mario Kart Tour and Dragalia Lost are largely behind us, they will doubtless continue with such apps at some point. But Nintendo Music, Nintendo Today, and Zelda Notes show a slightly different future shape for Nintendo's smart device strategy, as these apps will clearly need a lot of coordination. Also on floor 7 would be the Nintendo Classics Development Group. I use that name deliberately. With the rebranding of the Nintendo Switch Online console apps to Nintendo Classics and the incorporation of a distinctive Nintendo Classics aesthetic on Nintendo Today, I think this demonstrates a move from Nintendo to streamline the branding around their core content library. They have always made a play to use the fact that people grow up with Nintendo, of course, and we've always had initiatives from Virtual Console to NES Remix to reuse old games. But with not just the series of Nintendo Classics consoles, but also initiatives like the new Nintendo World Championships game, I think it's an active issue for the company to try to ensure that their back catalogue is utilised in the best possible way. We know that NERD and Paris were responsible for much of the emulation we've seen on Switch, including on the Super Mario 3D All-Stars title, and so it's likely that this would largely be the French quarter of the Kyoto offices, or at least remotely linking to France. The job of this group would be to work on hardware and software at that level to ensure the gradual and continual adaptation of Nintendo's archive of games to serve their current interests. As time goes by, they will need to make trickier and trickier adaptations, and while I doubt Satellaview is a top priority for the company, having one team minded to try to ensure that everything classic comes along for the ride only makes sense. Then there would be the Nintendo Music department, who would obviously be tasked with managing the app, but also directing and managing the use of music across Nintendo's whole suite of IP. Music is an example of where having a single managing department could lead to major cost savings in terms of economies of scale. For example, rather than assembling an orchestra from scratch for each game, if they are working at sufficient scale, then they could potentially manage a full-time orchestra, and technologies and innovations on one title could easily be transplanted company-wide. Finally, on this floor, we would have the team dedicated to the Tokyo-based Nintendo Pictures. While the bulk of this work may take place off-site, Nintendo Pictures' focus on video in games and motion capture will become increasingly important as games develop in scale and scope, and by having the contacts for Nintendo Pictures on the same floor as the systems architects, hopefully there will be some continuity in terms of technological provision. Plus, there has to be a decent chance that we could one day see a Nintendo Pictures app, just as we have seen a Nintendo Classics and a Nintendo Music app. Nintendo Pictures isn't primarily involved in feature film development, and I expect that Nintendo will continue to have its film strategy directed on a franchise by franchise basis. Otherwise, there will be no reason for them not to have partnered with Universal again for the Zelda movie. Still, it's possible that this department could also start managing a lot more of the bureaucracy associated with film work, with a view to one day developing an internal filmmaking capability at Nintendo. Going up then to floor 8, we would have the co-productions group, and it would be managing third-party collaborations. Some of these would effectively be so-called second-party arrangements, titles like Astral Chain, where Nintendo's own staff pitch in. There will also be communication with regular Nintendo partners who work on titles like Endless Ocean, Fitness Boxing, and so on, plus teams facilitating third parties who wish to deliver exclusives, or at least timed exclusives. The Duskbloods, Octopath Traveler, and so on would all have their liaisons on this floor. Also coordinated from here would be game testing. Previously, Nintendo has had various teams across the world dedicated to game testing, including subcontractors who reportedly did not get a very good deal. Even if game testing is subcontracted out, having one department managing all of these operations throughout EPD and their wider network of studios has to be of benefit as Nintendo scale up the number of games being tested at any one time. Finally, one group that I think Nintendo will need is a group to manage their amusements group, responsible for the theme park development, the Nintendo Museum, any arcade machines that they may still operate, and also managing the various Nintendo stores to ensure a coordinated and consistent offer. This would be one of the most technology-focused teams outside the main technology floor as Nintendo seeks to surprise and delight audiences across the world by making these physical locations as quirky and different as the games often are. This wouldn't need to be all that huge a department because Nintendo will still be reliant largely on external partners such as Universal Studios, but it's definitely an area of growth. Still, if Nintendo have ambitious plans, then by being on floor 8, they'll only be a quick hop on from floor 9, the technology teams. Nintendo's tech groups have been very strangely configured with multiple tech subsidiaries in Redmond, Paris, and the teams within Nintendo. Currently, we know there are at least 2 technology development groups. Group 1 was responsible for Alamo, while Group 2 was responsible for the development of Game Chat. Clearly, though, Nintendo is going to continue to have a voracious appetite for tech development, and I would suggest a configuration along these lines. Technology Development Group 1 would focus on toys, largely, though not exclusively, with an electronics component. We've already seen this with Alamo, of course, but Nintendo has a deep history as a toy manufacturer, and as the video game industry becomes just one plank of their business, I can see them trying to reach back into this market with more toys and innovative products that leverage their IPs and create new entertainment, drawing on hardware and software expertise. Technology Group 2 would focus on audio-visual technology, including camera and microphone technology. This potentially would include some weird areas of research, like holograms, continuing their investigations into glasses-free TV, exploring the use of projection, exploring VR, and generally trying to corral with the technology for innovative purposes. Managing game chat would be just one aspect of this team's remit. Technology Group 3 would be focused on accessories and variants for the Switch and Switch 2. From classic controllers to light revisions, this team would have the task of making sure that the current technology is as good as it could be. If the successor to Nintendo Switch 2 is to be a Nintendo Switch 3, and I suspect that Nintendo is some time from making that deliberation, then this is the team that will be developing it, taking a deep understanding of what makes the current system so successful, and evolving it into something new and different. Technology Group 4, on the other hand, will be dedicated to thinking the unthinkable and experimenting with concepts for a console which are well outside the current sphere of gaming. Just as the Wii once augured a revolution in games and double-screen technology seemed to come from nowhere, the time may once again come when Nintendo relies on thinking differently in a marketplace where their wares appear to have become stagnant. Several times with the Virtual Boy, DS, Wii, and Switch, we have seen them launch innovative consoles towards the middle of the life of prior consoles, floating them as potential successors. Virtual Boy didn't dethrone Game Boy, but DS capsized the Game Boy Advance despite being originally introduced as a third pillar of their games machines, while Wii cut short GameCube's life, and the Switch is instant success probably hastened the end of 3DS, although that machine had a very good run, come what may. The Switch series is very much a distillation of what's worked best from many, many years of Nintendo's experiments, from the motion controls of the Wii to the touchscreen of the DS to the handheld form factor of the Game Boy and the living room experience of the Famicom. This team, therefore, will be focused on thinking about what actually comes next. Technology Group 5 would focus on wearable technologies. I've talked before about the potential for a Nintendo smartwatch, and while I'm not sure that's quite in their field of vision just yet, wearables have a huge potential in a Nintendo space. What would a Nintendo hat do, and how would Nintendo trainers differentiate themselves? The days are long gone where, in Sonic Heroes style, you needed to find a computer room where all the tech would be located, looking like some kind of Jack Kirby Vista of weird and wonderful machinery. Technology is now integrated into everything, and so I think for a company like Nintendo, wearables has an outsized potential to be a growth market for them if they can find a way to surprise and delight their audiences. Technology Group 6 would be the Amusement Technologies team, working in lockstep with Floor 8's Amusements team, who would do more of the bureaucratic management. Their job would be to figure out how to make a Splatoon theme park ride or develop new technologies that could make for an entertaining amusement in its own right. They may also have a foot in arcade technologies, as while Japan's arcade business is declining and Nintendo pulled out of this to a large degree earlier than most of their rivals, it still seems like a pie in which they should have a finger, if only as a backup in case of emergency. After all, everything old often becomes new again when experienced by a new generation, and arcade machines may one day have their day in the sun yet again. Based on Floor 9 as well will be liaisons in Nintendo sales, as well as product safety experts. Let's zoop up now to Floor 10, and here we get a good chunk of what was once EPD4, now spread out across a whole department, the Kawamoto department, if you will. While a lot of this group's work will be focused on software development for Switch 2, they're next to the hardware development teams because this team would definitely be considering hardware software applications, whether in the form of Switch 2 accessories or in the items outside the Switch line, such as Alamo. So these would be the R&D groups. R&D Group 1 would be focused on toys in concert with the development teams below. Labo and Mario Kart Live Home Circuit will be two examples of the kind of thing they may start by developing, but obviously the sky is the limit. I think the Amiibo would be managed out of here, as potentially we could see the long-awaited and surely eventually inevitable Amiibo-specific game that leverages all the Amiibo at once. R&D Group 2 would be dedicated to casual, social, and party gaming. Much of this would come from the old EPD4, but also have a number of staff from Nintendo Cube. Clubhouse games, One-Two-Switch, and more would be developed here, but it's likely that they would be working also with the smartphones team and the amusements group to think about broader deployments of these kinds of game styles beyond just making console minigame collections. R&D Group 3 will be dedicated to a new market for Nintendo, or at least a significantly new market: education. Now, edutainment is a punchline in itself, and such titles have always had a terrible reputation, but from Art Academy and Mario Paint to knitting and language learning titles, Nintendo has had a fair history of trying to inform and educate as well as entertain. Big Brain Academy and Brain Training may be based here, but I think this group will be one of the most focused on aggressive business expansion by creating the kind of games that step well outside Nintendo's standard audience. R&D Group 4 will be dedicated to new online play experiences. They had such huge success with Splatoon, and with the gaming landscape now filled with online games such as Fortnite and Among Us, I think the mission to find the next cut-through idea is something that they will need people to take on. Not every game will need to operate at vast scale, of course, so they might not need to have Splatoon-type huge ventures, and they can bring in co-developers or draw from other development teams if and when they needed to go into full production on a major new online game. But the exciting thing here is that with a more interconnected and international game development setup, they could potentially draw from the specialisms of many different groups within the Nintendo umbrella: the multiplayer expertise of Next Level Games, the ability to harness the top talent of indie devs from Nintendo Software Technology, and the ability to deliver incredible graphical feats from the groups at Retro. R&D Group 5 will be dedicated to original RPGs. Primarily, this would be the new RPGs, a genre that is particularly successful in Japan and where Nintendo has the power to make a great impact, especially if they can facilitate the junior developers at Monolith Soft and Intelligent Systems to create all new RPG experiences. It's also where Golden Sun could potentially return if Camelot were willing and able, and where something like the next Tokyo Mirage Sessions could be developed. R&D Group 6 should be focused on developing new single-player experiences. Although these kinds of experiences are what Nintendo are best known for, they actually have an awful lot of these kinds of titles, so I don't think finding the next Metroid, Pikmin or Star Fox is as important to Nintendo for the immediate future as fully utilizing the franchises that they already have. Still, while we don't always see Nintendo develop new IP, titles like Astral Chain and ARMS show that they still have the passion and interest, and having a team that can accept the wild and wacky proposals and ideas of so many developers, internal and external, and arrange and broker partnerships and corral prototypes to build new games for both the core and casual audience, well, all this may provide the seed corn for many a future Nintendo franchise to hit the big time. Okay, we're nearly there. Although Nintendo's Kyoto building will reportedly be more than 12 floors now, floor 12 will be the last one dedicated to a specific remit of Nintendo's business going forward, and just as video games once broke away from their toy division to become a key pillar in its own right, just as they once had a handheld and consoles, and just as now they have a Switch operations and their wider IP expansion plans, this is another of Nintendo's business areas that I feel has the most potential to break out and become another distinct pillar. Floor 12 will be dedicated to lifestyle, wellness, and fitness, carved out principally from the current EPD4 and some of the existing technology departments. This would be a brand new floor focused on Nintendo and fitness. The global fitness industry is considered to be worth over $100 billion globally, and I think by bringing their own unique take on things, Nintendo will want to claim a slice of the pie. This would be yet another hardware-software floor focused on servicing not just the Switch 2 and its successors, but also exploring broader applications of these kinds of games. Wellbeing Development Group 1 will be a very familiar team, however. The Wii Sports Group seems to have largely reformed for Switch Sports, much as they were in the glory days of the Wii, and still under the directorship of Yoshikazu Yamashita. I'm sure this team will be considered every bit as important to Nintendo as their main franchise teams, given how huge Wii Sports was and how even Switch Sports is a major market leader for them. If they can make sports titles a core franchise of Nintendo systems once again, with multiple successful entries on each console, including at least one major evergreen in the mold of Wii Sports, then so much the better. Wellbeing Development Group 2 would branch off from the Ring Fit team, but may also leverage the kind of technology that Nintendo once purchased a stake in the Pux Corporation to acquire. From developing fitness RPGs to fitness monitors, the sky is the limit for Nintendo on this, as they try to take what for many is the difficult and frequently quite boring task of working out and give it a little bit of Nintendo surprise and delight. Wellbeing Development Group 3 would be in essence the Nintendogs team, but of course the group would have far more in its bowl than just Nintendogs. The potential for virtual pets is far vaster than it ever was before, with a mix of wearables, holographics, real-world toys and AI combining to make a far more diverse potential array of functionalities. The great potential here is to sell not just software for existing game consoles, but actual physical toys or else merchandise that utilizes virtual pet technologies. What if Alamo 2 has a virtual pet that lives inside your clock, that barks you awake and is happy to see you when you arrive in the room? This may seem like just a gimmick, but is actually a massive potential market, particularly in parts of Japan where people are caught between the pincers of having small living spaces where pets are sometimes not allowed, and increasingly being single, risking loneliness. Parasocial relationships such as virtual pets may seem niche, but I could see them being hugely popular among some kinds of people, especially if Nintendo can find a way to make these experiences non-isolating by creating communities around the pets. What if you took the pets for a walk in your apartment, but were connected to other people in the virtual park through game chat? At any rate, I think the virtual pet industry is one that deserves its own development team at the top of Nintendo Towers. Wellbeing Development Group 4 would focus on a range of other well-being technologies, including sleep tracking, scent technology, and cooking and nutrition. I don't imagine Nintendo will be setting out their own HelloFresh style delivery service quite yet, but good food is one of the oldest ways to surprise and delight people. And if Nintendo can find a way to gamify cooking in the same way they gamified fitness with Ring Fit Adventure and waking up with Alarmo, then they may find a new market. And so we've come to the final group on floor 12. This would be the Special Projects group, and their job would simply be to think of what Nintendo could do next that none of the other teams are working on. It would be mainly a place for people to pitch if they had an idea for a Nintendo hairdryer, or if they wanted to send a Mario Kart themed rover to explore the moon, or wanted a flower pot where PT Piranha dispenses soil advice, or anything else so bizarre that although probably absolute nonsense, 1 in 100 of these projects might turn out to be genius and definitive for the company's future. However, there is one more group that I feel will be beneficial, and it's a group that I don't have an enormous amount of hope for Nintendo assembling, given the reports of coffee cups resting on precious design documents from gaming classics and the lack of any true archiving system at Nintendo. And that is, across all the floors, a Nintendo archival team whose responsibility will be to store things and preserve records of the work that is done, including work throughout Nintendo's history. There are multiple reasons for this. For one thing, there are games which are works of art, and so the circumstance of their creation will be of immense interest, not least to the very kinds of people who are making games in the future. Secondly, it allows for knowledge transmission of Nintendo's past to its future teams. The Nintendo Museum was reportedly made in the first instance as a way of passing on an understanding of Nintendo's traditions to future generations of developers. Thirdly, though, it is likely to be a great source of income, as while it doesn't suit Nintendo to run commentary on their current efforts besides the occasional developer interview on their website, the time may one day come, maybe in 20, 50, 100 years' time, where they wish to leverage insights about their history, and at this point, having a deep and well managed archive may prove to be a very savvy investment. As I said at the beginning of this video, none of this is necessarily likely as I've laid this out, but even if the groups aren't named as I've named them and the floors aren't coordinated as I've suggested, I suspect that most or all of these aspects of Nintendo's future will be considered by various parts of Nintendo's operation, and this is the kind of trajectory I could see giving them the best chance to leverage their existing IP in major ways, to continue to trailblaze in the field of gaming more broadly, and to continue to push into new markets such as fitness and other hardware software technologies. With smart partnerships with external teams, they don't need and couldn't cope with everything being developed internally, and I think the block on progress will still be the capacity of those few developers with deep knowledge and understanding of Nintendo's philosophies and processes to build new teams that are able to share a common approach. It is likely that Nintendo's journey will be slower and far more incremental, but perhaps still magical all the same. Now I just need to go back and find the floor dedicated to Advance Wars. I'm sure it's there somewhere. Right? 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 Thank you so much for watching, and do let me know your own ways that you'd configure Nintendo's groupings in the comments below. Thanks to the Patreon members, and thanks for watching, liking, sharing and subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you again next time for another Nintendo Forecast.